Ladies, gentlemen, all those outside and in between, welcome to another episode of RenFare, a podcast dedicated to psychoanalyzing and critiquing media. I am your host, Connor Renfro, one half of From the Margins. Listen until the end for more ways to hear me and support the project. So far, we've applied literary criticism to television shows and movies, but today we're going to look at music and song lyrics.
When are we going to do actual books?
Listen, who has time to read with all this quarantine going on? My goal for today is to do a close reading of Mitski's Last Words of a Shooting Star from her third album, Bury Me at Makeout Creek. Before we dive in, let me give you a little background into the New Critics. New Criticism is a school of literary theory that was really popular a few decades ago. It came from formalism, which was a school that focused only on the text itself and not what surrounds it. New Criticism involves close readings to discern how a work of literature functions as a self-contained, self-referential aesthetic object. Basically, take a story or poem and analyze its aesthetic value, but only look for meaning within the text itself. Don't consider the author, the age it was written, or any cultural values that might shape truth or understanding. Poetry is a favorite object of close reading because poems tend to be shorter and more creatively formatted, and poems have more freedom to play with expression and language than a traditional prose author. One of the foremost figures of the movement is T.S. Eliot, from whose critical essays we get the concept of the objective correlative. This concept is pretty difficult for me to comprehend, much less explain, but I'm going to try. Wikipedia says the objective correlative is a group of things or events which systematically represent emotions. At first I thought it was referring to symbolism, using an object to convey meaning, but it actually looks like it's using setting or actions to convey the mood of the scene. Scottish socialist author and lecturer in creative writing D.D. Johnston, not to be confused with the elementary school in California, explained the objective correlative using the example of a funeral.
I'm not going to transcribe or directly quote him, but basically,
he said that when writing, you can't just say, the funeral was sad. You give examples like, she trudged behind the casket as it was borne to its final resting place, tears welling in her eyes. So we got nouns, casket, resting place, tears. We got verbs, trudging, which is basically walking sadly, bearing or being born. It's a fancy way of saying carry. It's official. It's somber. And welling, referring to the tears gathering in the lady's eyes. And we got an adjective, final, suggesting that this is an ending. The actions and images let the reader know that the funeral is sad without using those exact words. It's basically show, don't tell. Wikipedia also gives an example from Yosabu-san from Japan's Edo period. The piercing chill I feel. My dead wife's comb in our bedroom. Under my heel. So the piercing chill is, on one hand, the pain of accidentally stepping on a comb, but also the rush of memory that comes with it.
but what does that have to do with Mitski?
Song lyrics are the most popular iterations of poetry today. As a man of letters myself, I will definitely be drawn to a track's lyricism more than its music. As you can imagine, this can make it hard for me to find popular music I really like. But I do really enjoy listening to music. I just never received any formal education in it, so I can't evaluate what's good and not good. Or at least I can't articulate those values. I still need a song to have good music. There are plenty of lyrics I can appreciate without ever listening to, like those boring indie bands. But I also can't listen to a catchy tune if the lyrics aren't interesting. My biggest pet peeve is repetition. You'll get these banging electronic tracks, for example, with the richest soundscape and a talented vocalist, but they're only ever going to say the same 3 phrases for 5 minutes.
Shoot me.
Lyric poetry is usually written in the first person and emphasizes the speaker's emotions. It has a defined meter, or way you're intended to stress the syllables, because it's supposed to be set to music.
Well, that's how it was used in ancient Greece, when Aristotle made the distinction between lyric, dramatic, and epic poetry.
But not all lyric poetry needs musical accompaniment. The example that sticks out the most to me is Emily Dickinson. Her poetry uses the first-person I to tell stories and convey emotion. She also has a very defined meter. My AP literature teacher ruined Dickinson for me when she said,
If you can read a poem to the tune of Row, row, row your boat, then it's probably Dickinson.
"Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality." Song lyrics, as opposed to lyric poetry, privilege the musical accompaniment above the aesthetic quality of the lyrics. Where Dickinson can sometimes break meter and allow an errant syllable to throw off the tune, songwriters need to adhere to a strict meter and rhyme scheme to ensure their meaning and rhythm stay intact. For instance, in Taylor Swift's Ready for It, "And he can be my jailer, Burton to this tailor. Every lover known in comparison is a failure."
Thank you to Maggie for providing me with the correct transcription of those lyrics.
This isn't a dig on Taylor's writing. It's a stunning turn of phrase and mastercraft in poetry. It just always strikes me when I hear that line because the language is so different from the rest of that song. Songwriters also have to choose words that match the meter because stressing the wrong syllable can hinder listener comprehension. Every time you misunderstand a song lyric, it's probably because the singer either said the phrase strangely or broke the pattern your brain was anticipating.
Now we can move on to Mitski.
Mitski's lyrics are a perfect subject for new criticism because she keeps many details of her life private. Fans might be tempted to read meaning into her work and think they know her, but her interviews indicate that several assumptions are flat out wrong. We think of songs, especially by women, as confessional in nature. The artist is reporting their actual life to us, but that's not necessarily always true. New criticism asks that we remove the author from the equation and view only the text. So I will not treat the narrator of the song as Mitski herself, but as a speaker in a poem. Of course, artists put themselves in their works, but this exercise isn't meant to decipher that personhood from the art. Several themes come up in Last Words of a Shooting Star that are surely inspired by Mitski's experiences and perceptions, but we have to act as if that doesn't affect the meaning. Even unintentionally, an artist's worldview and culture influences their art, but we're going to ignore that unless the text asks us to consider them. When close reading a poem, it's always good to read the poem twice, once for form and again for meaning. Non-lyric poems have a multitude of devices that change their format, like enjambment, where a sentence or phrase bleeds onto another line. Luckily, Mitski doesn't enjamb too many of her phrases. Unfortunately, I can't play the audio for you because I don't want to pay to license it. I'm already using up my free use card to discuss the lyrics, which are protected under an entirely different copyright from the studio recording of the performance. So you'll have to listen to me recite the song. I'll try to match Mitski's meter while not actually singing and give pauses at the line breaks. Afterward, we'll break down the lyrics as if it was a poem, excavating meaning. Without further ado, Last Words of a Shooting Star. All of this turbulence wasn't forecasted. Apologies from the intercom. And I am relieved that I'd left my room tidy. They'll think of me kindly when they come for my things. They'll never know how I'd stared at the dark in that room, with no thoughts, like a blood-sniffing shark. And while my dreams made music in the night, carefully, I was going to live. You wouldn't leave till we loved in the morning. You'd learned from movies how love ought to be, and you'd say you love me and look in my eyes. But I know through mine you were looking in yours. And did you know the Liberty Bell is a replica, silently housed in its original walls, and while its dreams played music in the night, quietly, it was told to believe. I always wanted to die clean and pretty, but I'd be too busy on working days. So I am relieved that the turbulence wasn't forecasted. I couldn't have changed anyways. I am relieved that I'd left my room tidy. Goodbye. So we have 5 main stanzas and then 2 lines to close us out. Each stanza has its own scene, with the 5th one sharing a setting with the first one. The first 2 stanzas are parallel to the second 2 stanzas. 2 scenes, the second of which ends with an adverb and then an independent clause. This suggests that we're meant to find a similar logical progression in the ideas of those 2 sets. The final stanza recalls the first with changed language, returning us back to our initial setting with perhaps a deeper understanding of the themes and ideas. The last 2 lines close out quite abruptly. The motif of being relieved is repeated for the 3rd time, and then we receive a direct address. Goodbye. Now we get to dig into the juicy stuff. First, we have the title. Last words refer to the final things a person says before dying. A shooting star could mean an actual shooting star or a falling celebrity. From the title, we can infer that the following song will be about death in some regard. Shooting stars are associated with making wishes. Of course, streaks of light in the sky are not real stars, but rather meteoroids from outer space, which have been sucked into Earth's gravitational pull and burn up in the atmosphere.
Just dusty space rocks.
So now the title evokes a more somber sentiment. The meteoroid is burning up in the atmosphere and it's delivering its final words as it falls. Stanza 1. All of this turbulence wasn't forecasted. Apologies from the intercom. The speaker is on a plane that is experiencing unexpected turbulence. A flight attendant or the pilot is apologizing for the inconvenience. And I am relieved that I'd left my room tidy. They'll think of me kindly when they come for my things. The speaker anticipates dying in this plane crash and takes some relief in the knowledge that at least their room is clean. All of the images in this stanza deal with the broadcast of information. The turbulence wasn't forecasted. The weather report did not call for inclement weather. Apologies from the intercom. A disembodied voice tells our speaker that they're sorry. It's impersonal, it's bureaucratic, it's customer servicey. The intention of such an apology is to say, don't panic, we'll get you to your destination safely. Please don't let this rough air affect your evaluation of our services today. But the speaker isn't panicking. She's relieved that her room is tidy. Why? They'll think of me kindly when they come for my things. She's already accepted death, and she's glad her relatives or friends or executors are going to show up to a clean room. They'll think nice things about her because her room is clean. It's another sign, a broadcast of information. My room is clean, which means I am a good person. All 3 broadcasts are incorrect or misleading. The forecast was wrong, the apology is hollow, and the speaker wishes to leave a positive impression on the others. Stanza 2. They'll never know how I'd stared in the dark in that room. A very long line. With no thoughts. A very short line. Like a blood-sniffing shark. This refers to the myth of the shark as a predator that can be drawn to prey by the smell of blood from far away. In actuality, sharks might be able to detect blood from a quarter-mile away, but they aren't necessarily attracted to it. And while my dreams made music in the night, carefully, 1-word line, and it's an adverb, I was going to live. So the people who are coming to collect the speaker's things will be so impressed by her cleanliness that they won't suspect the truth, that the speaker is susceptible to spending long hours staring at nothing, at darkness. We can infer that this is not behavior the people, would deem as a positive thing. The speaker would like to conceal that information in favor of whatever conclusions they might draw from her tidy room. The next two lines modify how the speaker stares into the dark, with no thoughts, like a blood-sniffing shark. The archetype of the shark is that it has no consciousness, no higher thought. It just swims through the ocean, sniffing for food, and following the chemical trail to prey. The speaker doesn't think when she's having one of her episodes. We might call that dissociation, a catatonic depression perhaps, just listlessly existing like the shark until biology leads it to its next source of nutrition. The blood here might be the speaker's survival instinct kicking in, urging her to eat something, or it could be any reason to move. If the shark responds to the smell of blood by pursuing it, then perhaps the speaker is waiting to smell blood in the water as inspiration to stop staring at the dark. Her dreams are making music in the night, which possibly means she's composing in her sleep. She has no thoughts while she's awake, but dreams belong to the unconscious mind. Perhaps in that state, she's allowed to have fantasies and enjoyment, make music. She's active in her dreams, productive, not inert, not catatonic. But then we get the adverb, carefully. On a line by itself. Adverbs modify verbs, but which verb is it modifying? Make from the preceding line or live in the following line? Are her dreams making music carefully, or is she going to live carefully? It's a beautiful ambiguity. I was going to live as a line by itself makes me think she had come to the decision to remain living. Maybe she sits alone all day in a crippling depression, but her dreams make music, so she's going to choose to live. Or she could have chosen to live carefully, not take any risks, always do the safe option. But now she's on a turbulent flight and expecting to die, so the sentence is in past tense. I was going to live carefully. I intended to live carefully. How was I supposed to know my plane was going to go down? The turbulence wasn't forecasted. Stanza 3. You wouldn't leave till we loved in the morning. You'd learned from movies how love ought to be. And you'd say you love me and look in my eyes. But I know through mine you were looking in yours.
First off, this is a call-out. I'm the kind of person who looks for his own reflection in other people's eyes. Mitski actually wrote this stanza about me.
JK. Here we have a scene of the speaker directly addressing someone else. Has she been talking to this person the entire time? How does that recontextualize our understanding? The first two stanzas could have been a journal entry, but now she's communicating something to a specific entity. What I find interesting about this stanza is the repetition of the word love, but each time it's different. In the first line, it's a verb. You wouldn't leave till we loved in the morning. You wouldn't get out of my house until I had sex with you. I think of it as a play on making love and another choice verb with a similar vowel sound. In the second line, it's a noun. You'd learned from movies how love ought to be. This person might have a skewed or incomplete understanding of what love is because of media influence. Movie romance is big and sweeping, and it's often a reward. Common movie romance tropes are men winning a woman as a prize, usually secondary to a bigger goal, and women spending an entire movie trying to earn a man's love. Usually these movies have bigger themes of self-acceptance and empowerment, but the love object represents a reason to pursue those things and the reward for achieving them. Or maybe this person learned from movies how to express love. Movie sex scenes, romantic interactions between lovers in movies, movies, etc. But the characters in movies are portrayed by actors. They're not authentic. They're only simulating authenticity. To copy them would be to simulate a simulation. And if you're focused on the performance, you're not connecting with the other person. You don't have true intimacy. Movies are another medium to broadcast information. You'd say you love me is the most common verb usage of love, but we get the sense that even if the person says it, the speaker doesn't believe it, probably because they get all their moves from the movies. Follow this with the part about looking into my eyes, but I know through mine you were looking in yours. The other person thinks they love the speaker, but really they love themselves. They look into the speaker's eyes as an act of love, but seeing their own reflection makes the object of that love themselves. Meanwhile, the speaker is looking at the other person, the you character, watching them watch themselves through her. She's a reflective surface by which the other sees themselves, just like an artist creates deeply personal works that are consumed by an audience. Stanza 4. And did you know the Liberty Bell is a replica? The Liberty Bell is the bell in the Pennsylvania State House. The first one broke after one ring, so it was melted down and recast. The next one cracked again in the 1840s, 90 years after it was originally remade. Silently housed in its original walls, and while its dreams played music in the night, quietly it was told to believe. The inscription on the bell reads, "Proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof." It comes from a verse in the King James Bible about the Jubilee, or the instructions to the Israelites to return property and free slaves every 50 years. After the Revolutionary War, abolitionists in Pennsylvania adopted the verse as their rallying cry to end slavery in the United States. So the speaker is still talking to this other person. She asks, "Did you know?" Why would she suddenly bring up the Liberty Bell? Calling it a replica seems like a bit of a mischaracterization to me. A replica is a copy. This situation is more like a remake. A real replica was made, the Justice Bell, in 1915 as part of the women's suffrage movement, but it's in an Episcopal church, not the original walls. Even the real Liberty Bell is in a museum, the Liberty Bell Center in Independence National Historical Park. But she uses replica here because she's associating the Liberty Bell with herself. She feels like a replica of herself. I imagine she's subsumed her true identity into something that can be commodified and consumed. To be clear, I'm not talking about Mitski. I'm talking about the speaker of the poem, whom I believe to be an artist. She's a star. Her dreams make music in the night. Likewise, the Liberty Bell's dreams played music in the night. She's an artist and a performer, and the persona she performs is what gives her the sense that she's a replica. We also know that she obscures her true pain to other people when she mentions keeping her room tidy so that others will think kindly of her. And then we get another adverb. Does quietly modify played or told or even believe? Did the Liberty Bell play music quietly? Was the Liberty Bell told quietly to believe? Or was it told to believe quietly? And what is the bell being told to believe? Well, I mentioned the inscription and its ties to the abolitionist movement. When Speaker of the Assembly Isaac Norris commissioned the bell in 1751, he was commemorating the 50th anniversary of the passing of the Charter of Privileges, which granted religious freedom and civil liberties to the state of Pennsylvania. But no one really paid attention to the message until the abolitionists adopted it. And then that same verse became a rallying cry for several civil rights campaigns. The iconism is probably why suffragettes thought to make their own Justice Bell. So was the bell told to believe that the world would get better? That the bell itself would make the world better? Was it told to believe that its own symbolism and biblical allusion were both American values that it stood for? What is the speaker being told to believe? That her life will get better? That her suffering is worth it? That her art is going to inspire change in the world, like the message inscribed upon the Liberty Bell? Stanza 5. I always wanted to die clean and pretty. She wants to be a beautiful corpse. But I'd be too busy on working days. Her schedule is so packed that she doesn't have time to doll up and off herself. So I am relieved that the turbulence wasn't forecasted. I couldn't have changed anyways. It's ironic that she might die in this plane crash, probably not dressed to the nines with her full face on, but she's relieved because holding on to the vestiges of beauty were keeping her from just dying. So we're back in the plane. That was quite the journey she took us on, stewing in her own depression in her room, the last time she saw her lover, probably earlier that same day, and then a vignette about the Liberty Bell. In psychoanalysis, we might think of this as free association. One thought leads to the next because of unconscious links and themes.
I'm going to die. I'm glad I cleaned my room before I left for the airport. Now they won't go in and think I'm a slob. I wonder what you will think. You were with me on my final morning. You did that thing where you look at your reflection in my eyes.
And then, unconsciously,
you only love me because it allows you to love yourself. I play a role for you. You only know a shell of me.
And then that might spark some trivia she learned in Pennsylvania or by listening to NPR, like,
the Liberty Bell currently on display isn't even the original. What did the inscription say again? Something about liberty? Ha, not in this day and age.
And then her recursive inner monologue brings us back to the plane ride. She once again faces the prospect of dying, but this time she's pulled up all of her baggage surrounding false symbols and personas and what it means to love, and it reminds her of that silly, dark desire to die young and leave a beautiful corpse. Someone with that level of depression has probably contemplated suicide and viewed a lot of media that has glamorized or romanticized it. Her lover internalized an incomplete understanding of love from movies, so who's to say our speaker hasn't internalized her own share of negative perspectives? We return to I always wanted to die clean and pretty. Death isn't clean and pretty. The speaker probably knows that on a rational level, but she wants a death that is clean and pretty, not unlike the state she left her bedroom. A clean and pretty bedroom leaves others with kind thoughts about her. A beautiful corpse on display in a casket should likewise summon positive feelings for her. She can't drop the performance, the persona, the replica. That's the part of her that wants to die clean and pretty, to broadcast how she wants to be perceived to the mourners. But I'd be too busy on working days, so I am relieved that the turbulence wasn't forecasted. I couldn't have changed anyways. In what she thinks are her final moments, she realizes how silly it is to live for other people, to try to manage their perception of her instead of authentic connection. Now she's glad that she didn't anticipate the plane crash. She can die authentically, not gussied up and simulated for consumption. It's a relief. She's relieved. A burden has been lifted from her. But then we have the last two lines. I am relieved that I'd left my room tidy. Goodbye. So we're back to the tidy room. To me, this suggests that her earlier realization was more bravado than earnest. It's hard to completely unshackle yourself of the cognitive patterns that form around you over the span of an entire lifetime. You're not going to have one single epiphany and be cured of all of your complexes. Yes, she's relieved that she can cast off her pretenses and die, but she's still glad that people are going to come collect her possessions out of her house and remark on how clean it is. She ends with a farewell. Goodbye. Whom is she addressing? The you character from stanza 3? She might have been talking to them the entire song, right? Or is she saying goodbye to us, the readers, the listeners? Or is she saying goodbye to life in general? By saying goodbye to us, or to them, or to anyone, the speaker reveals that this too has just been a broadcast. The form of the poem is literally a song that you listen to. She's signing off. Nothing more. Goodbye. I want to conclude by going back to the title, Last Words of a Shooting Star. I said that a shooting star is just a meteoroid burning up in the atmosphere, which isn't the whole truth. The shooting star is actually the streak of light in the sky, what astronomers call a meteor. The meteoroid is just traveling aimlessly through space until it gets sucked into Earth's gravitational pull. Is our speaker likewise finding herself sucked into a pull, being forced out of her listless drift to burn up in our atmosphere? As the rock plummets toward Earth, the dust particles ignite from the friction and fall off, creating what looks like a tail. The shooting star we wish on is just burning dust. The falling star in our poem is a replica of herself who has created light around her to hide the darkness inside. All that dazzling light is just the dust being burned away. The shooting star, like every other broadcast, the incorrect forecast, the hollow apology, the clean room, the myth of blood-sniffing sharks, movies that peddle an incomplete portrayal of love, the empty gestures between performative lovers, the inscription on the Liberty Bell, is a falsity. Oh my god, wasn't that so much fun? I forgot how much I loved just digging into an actual text. So much more rewarding than drolling on about a TV show, right? I should do this more often. If you have any song recommendations for close reading, please share. And listen to Mitski, she's the best. I miss her every day. My personal interpretation of the song is that the plane doesn't really crash. I think of it as like a split-second free association of thoughts, like stream of consciousness writing that's broken down into concise vignettes. Let me know if you have a different interpretation. Thank you for listening to RenFare. I hope you'll join me next time. RenFare is available to listen wherever you find your podcasts. If you like this content and want to hear more, feel free to follow me on Spotify, Anchor.fm, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Radio Free Public, Bullhorn, and several others. RenFare is also uploaded to the From the Margins YouTube channel that I share with my content partner Violet Knight. You can join us there to hear us discuss current events and our own interests. If you feel so inclined, you can join the discussion by becoming a member of our Patreon to support the growing channel. From the Margins with Violet and Connor is also available to stream on the audio platforms I listed above. Please check us out there as well. Until next time.